Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Match+Book series on the EBPL podcast. My name is Paul. I am the Adult Services Librarian here at EBPL, and this is a podcast dedicated to helping you find the next great book that matches your personal preferences, fiction, nonfiction, sometimes genre-heavy, sometimes less specific. The podcast was taken from a form that's on our website. If you are on our homepage, go to the Explore tab, and then under the Adult Reading subheading, and then EBPL Match+Book form. And it's where I take most of the questions. So I got this question a few months ago, and I thought it was applicable with this episode coming out in October, the spookiest of all months, I would say. Just walking around and seeing all the fall decorations coming up, I was really inspired to do an episode on this topic. So somebody asked me, kind of recommend horror books, but horror books from different subgenres. So it's a really great question, and it forced me out of my comfort zone, which is also kind of the point as well, so that I could recommend things that I'm not used to, so that maybe you could also find things you wouldn't have otherwise stumbled upon either. So we're both learning as we go on. The first one I want to talk about is called Horror Movie. That's a book, and it's about a horror movie. So it has this meta kind of cursed film aspect to it. Anyway, the book is by Paul Tremblay, who gained a lot of popularity years ago for his book called A Head Full of Ghosts. It's really quite popular. And then he also wrote The Cabin at the End of the World, which was adapted by M. Night Shyamalan to the movie Knock at the Cabin. So he's kind of like a modern mainstay of the genre, I would say. In the book, we ping pong back and forth between the present day and a look at where our characters are, and the past, where we really get started with meeting the characters, getting introduced to them, and showing how they made a horror movie altogether. And it was supposed to be this notorious, disturbing art house movie, like Gonzo kind of thing. It was a group of guerrilla filmmakers, shoestring budget, not dissimilar, I would say, from something like the Blair Witch Project. There's a malevolent presence. And even in the past, when we're seeing the making of the film, we get snippets in between all the dialogue and action and everything, and we get to see the actual script. So it's really interesting to kind of meld genres in a way where we're getting horror fiction, but also fully detailed horror movie script as well for this fake horror movie that they made in the book. And I guess part of the lore back then was that the film that they had made never was actually released. So because of that, it gained this really rabid fan base online years later, where there were all these message boards and threads dedicated to finding out how they could find it, the backstory and everything like that. And so as we learn more about the actual filmmaking process, what went into it, we see that there's only one surviving member of the production still alive in present day. And we get to see the bizarre moments in the filmmaking and how that informed how we see this person in present day and his memories of how reality and film blurred and past blur, and really what that does to him psychologically and how it overtakes his own personal life. Just from this one production he didn't want to do all these years prior. So it's a very strange conceit for a book and a very unusual format. But the screenplay in and of itself, while being just something that was conceived by the author for this book, it's really quite amazing. It's so detailed and feels like something that could actually be made into a pretty solid horror movie nowadays. So I really, really enjoyed this one. Lots of different twists and turns, and just a very odd concept. And the author really commits to it, into wanting to scare you and unnerve you and rattle you in so many ways. So I would definitely check that one out if you want something that's going to maybe throw you off kilter and also kind of wow you in a way that you may not be expecting beforehand. The next book I wanted to discuss is called Middle of the Night. It's by Riley Sager, who is quite well known in recent years. He's been pretty prolific these last 5-10 years. Recently wrote a book called The Only One Left that was very popular. Home Before Dark is another great book by him. But what piqued my interest was that it is locally set. It takes place in a cul-de-sac in a quaint New Jersey suburb just outside of Princeton. And this, I would say, is definitely horror, but it tends more toward the mystery aspect of horror. And in it, we meet a middle-aged man who moves back to where he grew up on this cul-de-sac in New Jersey. And as his parents have retired, his life's fallen apart, so he just needs somewhere to stay. It's supposed to be just a temporary move. And an odd thing keeps happening where he is forced to reckon with the mystery of his long-lost friend who was taken from the tent that they were camping in his backyard years ago when they were just little kids, and who's never been found since. So, a great premise. What happened to the friend? All these things keep happening, though, to our protagonist. All these clues, these signs that only his friend who had disappeared or would be aware of, keep kind of hearkening back into his life. And so he has to reckon with, is this the supernatural? Is his friend actually out there somewhere? Is this actually happening? Or is this some sort of insomnia-induced fugue state? So we also see, while that's happening, concurrently, all of the people he grew up with who lived in the cul-de-sac all seem to be still there in the neighborhood. And so they kind of learn more about our protagonist over time, and they all seem a little sketchy in ways that he didn't realize when he was younger. So he has to contend with that as well. But it's a real slow burn of a mystery, and things that Riley Sager does amazingly in all of his novels, at least all the ones I've read, is injecting this sense of supernatural phenomena that seems like into reality in ways that seem so plausible and almost even, I would say, mundane, to make it almost bland in a way that, of course, this makes sense, that of course this would be happening. And I don't see too many authors who really get to the heart of that and really do that in a way that's really clever and smooth. The prose is so clear, it grounds such bizarre instances in firm reality that, I don't see too many authors pull off. And of course, I'm not going to spoil the ending, but I'm saying that he builds this up throughout the book. It really pays off, the ending, in how we see nostalgia, supernatural reality, and the heart of the mystery all kind of come to a head. And I don't want to say solved, but there is closure in a way that makes sense for humanity, but also to the unexplained things that happen around us all the time. So I think that's what he really succeeds at. I would recommend really all of Riley Sager's books because they all do this so well. But Middle of the Night, definitely recent book, just came out, really great mystery horror fusion. And the last book I wanted to discuss today it's called Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll. And this is more of a historical fiction bent to horror, kind of in the vein of like a psychological thriller. So something a little different, I'd say, for horror, but definitely it's nice to have these offshoots in so many directions. That's the point of the genre, is to carve out your own niche in a way. So this book takes place between two time periods and two perspectives. The first perspective is from Pamela. And when we see her, she's a college student. It's 1978, and she wakes up in the middle of the night to find that there is possibly a serial killer in her house. We then also see Pamela in modern day when she is trying to connect the events she witnessed as a college student to another case that feels quite similar to what she went through as a student. We also get to meet Ruth, who is our secondary protagonist, and her timeline is a little bit before Pamela's, but not really spoiling anything because it's laid out pretty early on in the book. But she is also going to be one of the serial killer's victims. And so we have this tension here between these different timelines, these different characters, the push and pull of that. And so the real element that gives this like a historical edge is that the crimes that are depicted in the book are based on that of Ted Bundy. So we have this loosely fictionalized version of Ted Bundy. And what the author does very well is, for some reason, Ted Bundy has gained this reputation as this almost magnetic, suave personality. It's how he's depicted often. And when we really get to the meat of the book and I'd say emotional reality of what is going on in the book, and this is based on historical record as well, the author does a great job showing that he was not that way. He really wasn't that way. And the would-be victims who have lived to tell their tales were more or less just irritated with him and could kind of tell that there was something off about him, wasn't quite right, but also they just ignored it and went on with their lives. So until they were able to piece together more information about his crimes. So that's really where the book succeeds, is not just in giving the humanity back to the victims, but also refocusing who they are and why they would fall prey to somebody like him, situating in this historical context. So definitely check that one out if you're interested. It's a really great look back at something that has been visited a lot in historical record and through documentaries, film, all of this sort of thing. So those are the 3 books I'd recommend today that definitely bring horror to life in all different ways. Please check them out. All great books in their own way. Thank you for listening, and thank you to Melissa Hosick for editing this episode. If you'd like to listen to the Match+Book series in the EBPL podcast, you can do so at ebpl.org/podcast. Thank you.